I had sort of a frustrating run up to Oregon. I advanced to the semis a couple of times, but in the year or two leading up to it, I was sort of having a rough time, and I had to sort of sit down and think about why it wasn't working.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I'm so glad to have you here today. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what's going on here. And I'd love to hear from you. Send me a message at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know a little bit about yourself, any ideas for the show, any guests you think would be great to bring on. That would be great. And I know you're going to dig today's episode featuring Ted Botsford. Ted is currently a bass player in the Seattle Symphony. And between the time of us doing this interview and me actually putting it out, he actually just auditioned for and won a position in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. So congratulations, Ted. That's great news. Ted, before playing in the Seattle Symphony, he played in the Oregon Symphony, and he studied with Paul Ellison in college, and also his first bass teacher was George Vance. We dig into all sorts of topics, like taking an audition when you're already holding down a full-time job and how that's a different approach to when you're a student, struggling in auditions, and a book recommendation from Paul Ellison that really helped. And we really dig into teaching in the second half of this interview. We talk about when to introduce technique in an abstract sense, in addition to just working on pieces. We talk a lot about the Vance Progressive Repertoire series and approach to teaching. We talk about this great free bass class that the Portland Youth Orchestra sponsors, focusing on the things that Francois Rabath talks about, developing the bow arm from the beginning, what Ted does himself to keep in shape, and how he varies his warm-ups to keep things fresh. Working with Chris Hanielek in LA and how that had a major impact on Ted's playing before getting the job in Oregon. So many great topics. I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, and we are doing a Helicore Strings giveaway here at the beginning of 2017. So check out contrabassconversations.com/strings to get entered in this giveaway. They're going to be giving away a set of the orchestra, pizzicato, and hybrid strings. And I've used all of these strings before. For years, I used the hybrid strings, which are warm Helicore tone, but they've got great pizzicato sustain as well, and a good bow response. They're used by Barry Bales, Daniel Kimbrough of the Jerry Douglas Band. We're actually going to be having Daniel as a guest coming up soon, Larry Grenadier, and so many others. Thank you, D'Addario, for sponsoring the podcast. And all D'Addario strings are engineered, designed, and crafted in their string factory in New York. And I'd also like to thank Bass Capos for providing hosting for Contrabass Conversations. And if you're looking to implement a double bass extension, Bass Capos are easy to install and adjust. They're cheaper and more reliable than hand-built latches, and they're light and quick to operate. Learn more at basscapos.com. In addition to the interview, we're also going to be featuring Ted playing Briez by Francois Rabath, Just Melody by Patrick Nayer, and who, by the way, is an upcoming podcast guest as well, and Le Grand Tango by Astor Piazzolla. I know you're going to enjoy this interview with Ted Botsford. Here we go. Some topics that people are always interested in that listen to, they like a common question is like, how'd you get your job? Right. And a question I got recently, someone wrote in is like, how did you get another job when you already had a professional orchestra job? How did your audition, just like preparation process change? Maybe like from winning that Oregon job to then like winning the Seattle job? Because I'm sure you were just busier. How did you schedule practice time when you already had a professional job?
Yeah. So I did certainly a different preparation style than I did when I was a student or didn't have a job. The nice thing about the Oregon schedule is that we did have a fair amount of time that we weren't playing, so I was able to practice at least enough that I felt like I was
right.
preparing well.
Sure.
In some ways, I approached my Seattle audition from the mindset of I was able to sort of think about preparing based on how I was playing in the orchestra, so that I was able to sort of practice a piece, even if it wasn't the piece that was on the audition. I was able to sort of practice the style if it was a similar piece that was in the orchestra, or I could sort of isolate bits of excerpts that I knew really well, that I knew maybe were a little bit weaker, and not have to just like learn, practice the whole thing every time. And in some ways, it was nice for me to be busy, to not have that psychological thing of the audition looming over my head. And, it was just another thing that was coming up that I had to prepare for. And for the Oregon principal job, which I took and came very close to, I was playing a Mahler 5 week during that audition. And, in some ways it took my mind off the sort of dread
right, sure.
of taking the audition,
Yeah.
And then you just sort of have you have the sound of the orchestra in your head, so you're able to sort of, easily recreate that. It's sort of like playing along with recordings, but it's also a live thing. So.
Yeah, something Kevin was talking about when I was interviewing Kevin Brown. He was saying like something he hears like listening to auditions that he didn't realize like when he was taking is like just the sense of flow that you get when you're actually spending your daily professional life like playing orchestra music at tempo, right? Because you spend so much time like dissecting these excerpts at this very slow analytical way, and like just how your playing kind of changes like when you actually play Mozart symphonies in tempo like every day.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a different thing for sure. And your playing does change for having done that too. I mean, I hope that I am keeping up my skills in a way that's still contributing to this section. But like, yeah, you don't have to do as much of the nitty gritty tempo work when you're preparing it, because you have the rest of the group around you to help you play it, so you can be like listening to the violas to help you keep in time, or you can be watching the conductor to see this entrance or the character that you want. So so you have a lot of help when you're not just playing by yourself.
Rewinding just like a little bit, and again, like things that people always seem to want to know about, like just kind of your earlier audition journey, maybe toward Oregon. Had you taken a lot of auditions? Was it like a journey of like frustration and then an aha moment, and then all of a sudden things started clicking? Like maybe just like zoomed out. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, well, I had sort of a frustrating run up to Oregon. I advanced to the semis a couple of times, but in the year or two leading up to it, I was sort of having a rough time, and I had to sort of sit down and think about why it wasn't working. And Paul, I was still in Houston after I graduated from my master's. I was freelancing there for a year, and Paul actually turned me onto this book. Paul Ellison turned me onto this book called "Performing in the Zone" by John Gorey. It's sort of a sports psychology book, more or less, but it's written by a trumpet player who, so it's sort of geared towards musicians, and it's all about sort of preparing your mind for being able to just turn on a peak performance whenever you want. And I thought that one was very helpful for me. I know there's a lot of similar books. I think I read Inner Game of Tennis and Inner Game of Music also, and those were helpful as well. So yeah, for me, I think it was a psychological battle. I think because what would happen is I would practice leading up to it, but then I would sort of have this relapse when I got under pressure, and stuff wouldn't work. So just being able to sort of train myself to play at the level that I knew I had prepared to, that book was really helpful for that.
I don't know that book. That's I'll be sure to look that up and check that out.
Yeah, I think he's Australian, so it might not be in huge circulation here, but but it was helpful for me. I know that everyone has sort of the book that they read, and that, you know, it gives them the aha moment, and that one was the one for me. So,
did it change like your process? Like what did you? I'm sure it made you think about things differently. Did it change anything you were doing externally? Like, did you start to practice in a different way to hold up better under pressure or anything like that?
Yeah. Let's see. I think I started playing for more people. There are various mental exercises you can do. Yeah, so I would do these exercises when I would sit down to practice, you know, so that it would become a habit to do those every time I played the piece. One of the things is to think about like the energy level that you want when you're starting an excerpt. Like, is it on a scale of 1 to 5? Is it a +1, or is it like a -1? Do you want it to be with more subdued character, you know? So yeah, it's like -5 to +5 or something like that. Like, that was one thing that helped. I did a fair amount of. He has this section about qigong. It's like I think it's like a Chinese breathing exercise. I'm not totally sure, but the way he described it was very helpful. It just sort of helped you calm and focus your energy so that you were building the best habits that you could, you know.
Did you grow up in the D.C. area? If George was your teacher, where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. It's a suburb of D.C. And George just happened to be the teacher nearest me. My sister actually started playing cello before I started playing bass. She went to study with George's wife, Martha. And then, you know, I sort of decided that I wanted to have something to do like that too. I mean, I had been playing piano before that. It never took.
Right.
You know, I did keep it up all through high school and stuff like that, but I didn't practice a whole lot and stuff like that. So, but yeah, the bass, you know, George was just like the guy who was there, and we had lessons at the same time, so it was convenient for my parents, and you know, that's sort of how I got started.
Okay. How old were you when you started with George?
I was 9.
Oh, you're 9. Okay.
So not quite as young as some of his younger kids, but still relatively young. I was always sort of a big kid too. So, but like I started on a quarter-size bass.
And did you start? You know, like I teach a fair number of beginners these days, and I've just become totally. I just can't say enough good things to anybody who asks about the Vance books and progressive repertoire. That going through that. So Did you start on like page 1, book 1? Is that how you started with him?
Yeah, that was basically it. I mean, he was still doing the bass project stuff when I started, so I have the copies of his books that he bound in his basement, you know, and you know, it still has Hal's name on the cover and all of that. It was a few years later that he got published by Carl Fisher. And let's see, there was a Peabody workshop that happened, and I think I went to the last one before Hal moved to Philly. So that's sort of the time, you know, sort of the rough time when I started with George.
When did you meet Paul for the first time? Was that when you were in high school or early on? When did that happen?
I think it was the 97 convention, ISB convention. It was at Rice, you know, and I think I played for him in a master class or something like that. And, you know, that's sort of the first time we crossed paths. I guess I went to Domaine Forget in high school too, so I would have worked with him then, I think. And then when it came time to apply for college, I wanted to go study with him, and you know, I sent in the audition tape and all that stuff. But he you know, early on in the process, he said that he didn't know if he'd have a space in the studio even for anybody. So I, you know, I freaked out a little bit and auditioned for like 12 other schools. I mean, ultimately, they worked it out. I don't know what happened or, you know, why it happened, but there was a space and he accepted me, and that was, you know, that was great.
Yeah. Was music it for you from the beginning, or like, was there a point where you just like, aha, this is the direction for me? Was there a specific moment for you? How'd that work?
Well, Yeah, I mean, it was always kind of my thing. That's how I identified myself in high school and stuff like that. I was the kid who did music and whatever. But I guess I didn't really think about it as a future profession or life goal or whatever. I think the turning point might have been my junior year summer when I went to the UTI, the Tanglewood Institute, and sort of saw that it could be a more serious thing. And I guess I jumped over the fact that for my last 3 years of high school, I was in the National Symphony Youth Fellowship Program. George sort of encouraged me to audition for that, and I switched to studying with Rick Barber, who's the assistant there, and that sort of pushed me in a direction of a more orchestrally based thing, or at least in conjunction with the solo type playing that I was used to doing. And I was actually listening to Jeremy Kurtz's episode yesterday, and he was talking about being a member of that program too. So I guess I had forgotten that he was in that too. But it's it was a great thing that the National Symphony did, where you get free lessons from a member, and you get to go watch rehearsals once a month, and meet the soloist, meet the conductor, ask them questions. It was a great experience. And then the BUTI thing sort of built on that momentum, and I got more and more interested in orchestral playing, ensemble playing.
I've been really focused on teaching through the progressive repertoire. I've been with my students, and just the other day, a student of mine was asking, like, when do we start learning scales? And I thought, that's a good question, because I used to focus on Samandal and doing these, and I had all my own scale sheets, and I'd love to know, like, how did that all fit together, like when you were studying with George? I know he ended up putting out his Vade Mecum and those exercises. Like, do you remember when you started actually doing just like scales like we think of them?
Not specifically, actually, but I think it was just an organic growth out of the things that we were doing. I mean, I think he puts a scale and some variations in book 2, I believe.
Yeah. Right
before a sheet may safely grace, so you can sort of get going on that idea. And then, with the students that I've taught, that's about when I at least introduce the idea. It depends on the student whether they're ready to play other keys or whatever, but I sort of introduce the idea of technique in an abstract sense, in addition to sort of working on the pieces. A lot of my time with George, I don't have a lot of specific memories, surprisingly. I think he was so good at sort of tricking students into learning things, You didn't really feel like you were sort of being taught. It was just like you go and hang out and play some bass, and then it was great.
That's some sophisticated magic there. I mean, that's like some real high level teaching to make it see like, that's what I think we all kind of aspire to do, right? Like make it not be work for them, or frame it so that it's not work.
Right. Yeah. So,
you've taught I'm assuming you've taught like beginners as well. I'm sure advanced players come to you too, but have you taught, like, started people off on bass too, or taught some younger students as well?
Yeah, I had a few students that I started from the very beginning in Portland. One of the great things that they have going on there is the youth orchestra sponsors this free double bass class, and it's great. Because it's free for the kids. They can just come and sort of get a sense. And then what would happen is that if the kids were actually, really into it, they would approach the teachers about lessons. And, several of us got students that way. And let's see, I started one kid who is still playing. I actually teach him Skype lessons now. And then there was another girl who I passed to Nina, but I started her from the beginning too. And for the beginners, I think about, the things that Francois talks about, which is like developing the bow arm from the very beginning and making sure that they, start with really good habits so that it doesn't have to be rehabbed later. I try to always be playing so that they have a sound in their head that they're trying to match and things like that.
Are you like with, especially with those early students, how much are you using the printed page in those early lessons? Like, is it like, are you basically teaching them by rote and then you like point to the page and, by the way, this is what we're doing? Or are you like focusing on the actual printed music, or like to what degree do you do that? Yeah,
I think I probably do more of the printed page than then I should. If we're talking about the way that George used to teach and the Suzuki method and stuff. But yeah, a lot of it is by rote, especially at the beginning, because there's so much to manage, learning how to hold a thing and how to make a sound and all that stuff. So yeah, certainly at the very beginning it's by rote, and then I'll sort of say this is what it looks like on the page. And often the kids will be getting instruction from their school teacher about how to read and stuff like that. So
yeah, that's the thing with bass. I mean, a lot of the people, because like if you're in like the violin or piano world or something, you're probably also teaching them how to read music. But if you get someone who's kind of a more traditional American education system, I mean, rarely have I had a beginner that has had zero, where I'm like teaching them the notes on the staff, like from day one. I mean, sometimes, but
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of the kids that I have taught already have that skill. So I haven't had to spend as much time sort of teaching where the notes are on the page and how to read what you're doing. Anyway, the ear is the more important thing anyway. And I always, if there's any question, I always sort of prioritize the right hand and the sound production over putting the left hand in the right place or worrying about intonation. I think that's the stuff that will come as they sort of develop their internal pitch and sense. But the bow arm is the thing that I feel like is more important.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah, like what do you do to get them? I mean, kind of super broad topic, but like, what do you do to get them thinking about sound? Or like, what do you just start playing open strings at the beginning of every lesson, or do you you play, they play? Like, what's your process for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, something I still do that I learned from George is called tone research, and I mean, I'm sure there's many different names for it, but you would start the day by playing 4 open D strings, and sort of after you play those 4, you think about how the sound was, how your bow arm felt, and then you sort of evaluate and do it again and sort of find research that tone and that sound.
I like that. I haven't heard those. Is that George's phrase, tone research?
Yeah, it's one of the things that's really stuck with me over the years. Yeah, and I still do it. I still start by playing open strings, even if I'm tuning while I'm doing it, I'm still sort of thinking about sort of resetting the bow arm and coming back to the instrument after sleeping or whatever. If I'm coming back from a break, that's a good way to do it too. I try to do that with the students too, especially early on, and it helps them sort of hear and feel what's going on with the relationship between the bow and the string. And it's a simple enough idea, without having to play a tune or a scale or whatever else. You can really just focus in on that one aspect of your playing.
Yeah, and I love you do that yourself too. I was this round 2 I did with David Allen Moore. I was just watching some videos of him doing some teaching online, and he had this whole video about what he calls musical hygiene. Like it's like brushing your teeth every day. Like doing that every day just to kind of tap into those core concepts. Like, so you do that. Like, what else do you do on a daily basis? Like at the level you're at, just to kind of keep your playing headed in the right direction?
Well, see, I mean, I try to keep up with at least a short scale thing. It depends on how much we're working, because the schedule here is pretty taxing. But I try to do some kind of left hand warm up. I have a couple different like double stop exercises and some string crossing things, and I try not to be too regular with my warm up. I like to sort of give myself the freedom to play whatever comes to mind. And that sort of helps me just, keep warm up and keep the fingers nimble. And I mean, I'm always thinking about what I'm doing. I'm always evaluating and, thinking about what I could be working on.
question I like to ask people, and again, I'm a fan of some of these super broad questions, so apologies but you're still a relatively young guy, but like if you could go back and like externally, if someone looks at your resume, they're like, wow, he was like killing it from day one. They would probably, although, like you were struggling in auditions and just what you were talking about, just those realities we all face. But like, if you could go back in time to like 18-year-old Ted, or you could pick the age, some younger Ted, and offer some words of wisdom from slightly older Ted. Like, do you have anything you'd like to pass along?
Well, I think that when I was younger, I wasn't listening as carefully as I could have been. I think I had sort of an idea of how I wanted to sound and what I wanted things to be like, and that was it. And I sort of wrote off some things that I heard people say or styles of playing or anything like that I now realize would have been helpful for me to sort of absorb at that point. Because I think about Francois and his sort of style of playing, and I don't necessarily play exactly like him, but I don't think he would want me to either. But then I also think I was in LA for 3 months before winning the Oregon audition, and I worked a little bit with Chris Hanulik, and like that was a huge influence on at least my orchestral playing, and I would say probably all of my playing. And just sort of being open to as many different ideas and approaches, and sort of trusting sort of innate musical sense to sort of filter it out and find your own voice. Not to write anything off out of hand. Yeah,
no, totally. It's great you mentioned Chris. I think in my next episode coming out, well, I get 2 episodes from now is Chris Hanulik. I talked to him when I was down in LA. Yeah, which is super cool. Do you remember any specifics about like working with him? Like what you found helpful that he might have said, or like, because I know he's like such a musical guy and plays it and it sounds amazing, and you just want to do exactly that. Do you have any takeaways from playing for him?
The thing that just sort of stuck in my mind is just sort of the sense I got when he would demonstrate something of sort of the intensity and the focus of his musical aesthetic. It was just, there was no beating around the bush. It was very clear what he wanted to do, and the sound was, huge.
Right, sure.
and rich and full, and all the things that you want in a bass sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he approached it differently than I had been taught up to that point, but it was sort of eye-opening for me to see that and to hear him talk about it.
Ted, thank you so much for chatting, and congratulations on the LA Philharmonic spot. That's such cool news. And that's going to do it for another episode of Contrabass Conversations. I'm so glad that you took the time to tune in. I know that Ted appreciates it. I appreciate it. It's so fun to see what's going on with all these dynamic young players in the world of the double bass. The future is bright indeed. So check out our vast archive of previous shows at contrabassconversations.com. Download the app. It's a great way to dig through this content. contrabassconversations.com/app. If you want to go through the index and get a little more specific on topics, we talked about auditioning today. If you want to hear about other audition experiences, go to contrabassconversations.com/index, and you can look that up. Mindset, physical fitness in the bass, all those kind of topics. That's all laid out there. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.